So hello everybody, just about to start. One thing I just wanted to make people aware of, because I know some people watch this from the Pragmatic site. In order to be able to participate in the chat and ask questions, you need to go to the YouTube page. So if you are watching from here, if you click YouTube, it will take you directly to the YouTube live stream, and then you can type something in here if you want to ask me any questions. You can also, if you want to, pop out this chat window, so you can keep this separate and then maximize this window if you wish. The format is 20 to 30 minutes of me just going through some various things. After that, as many questions as you want to ask me, either about the PEAF self-study, about POET or PEAF in general, or about enterprise architecture in general, or in fact anything to do with the transformation domain, of which PEAF of course is just one part. So let's get this out of the way here so we can see what we're doing. And there's a couple of things I wanted to go through tonight. Incidentally, if you want to let people know where you are in the world on the chat, that might be interesting. I suspect there's quite a lot in the States. So what I wanted to do was go through a couple of things really. First, you should probably already know about Mace and Magma, so I'll just briefly introduce those, but then I want to go through some kind of a journey as to how I arrived at Mace and Magma and why I think Mace and Magma are so important. After that, we'll go into how you do assessment, maturity assessment, and introducing the Enterprise Transformation Maturity Canvas, which is a much faster way of getting an initial idea of your transformation domain for an organization to do that. So if I just move this out of the way, I shall begin. So there are various high-level kind of ontologies, groupings that people use in order to talk about the structure of things. So what things are formed of their kind of constituent parts. The common ones are POLDAT, process, organization, location, data, applications, and technology. BDAT is another one, business, data, applications, technology. But we use MACE, which I'll explain a little bit later after Mace and Magma. So methods, that's where we look at the methods that people are performing to do something. These methods act on the artifacts, so the artifacts are things that are input and output from these methods. And depending on whether the methods are being produced or operated by people, if that's people, then there's this cultural aspect to that. If the methods are being operated on by technology, there's the technology environment that those methods are acting within. So in terms of the structure of things, people are kind of used to structure, especially architects, because architecture is all about the fundamental structure of something. However, I've also introduced something called Magma, which deals with a very high level view of types of information in relation to transformation. So not the structure of something, but in terms of changing something. So motivation is what is motivating us to change? What are the requirements? Actions are what are we actually doing to change? Guidance is things like principles, policies and standards. So what is guiding our actions as we execute them? And then measures are how do we measure how we're performing, and assessment is if you do an assessment against those measures, then the assessment information goes there. So that's what Magma is, transformational information. So a lot of people have looked at or always assume structural information, but we've also defined this transformational information as well. So where do these come from? Sometimes interesting and useful to understand where things come from, the why, the bigger picture. That kind of is maybe a better way of explaining things. So when I first started looking at enterprise architecture in the early 2000s, people were talking about the structure of things, and that's not surprising since architecture is all about the structure of things. So dependent on what tool you were looking at or what framework you looked at, there were various entities, various names, things that people used to refer to or would refer to things in terms of the structure of things. So we've got things like departments and locations, we've got activities, processes, applications, data technology, all that kind of structural kind of stuff. And there was also the understanding that in order to actually push change out or to make something real at a physical level, you first need to know what the operational information is before you instantiate it in operations. But before you do that, there's a physical model of that information, and probably there's a logical level of information as well, and conceptual, maybe contextual. Because we can't just go from a big structure at the top straight down to physically changing things. We kind of go through these levels of abstraction. So that was kind of the world. Then people started saying, okay, that's fine for enterprise architecture because that's structure, but we have to look at what's driving that as well. Why have we got that structure? So then, and people added sort of strategy type things to their models and their modeling tools. Things to do with, why. Specifically from a strategic point of view, the business motivation model was one of those things that were quite common that people used in that area. Some people used that or expanded it, other people used things of a similar name. So this strategically is what we want, and this is the structure that's going to help satisfy the strategy. So that sort of sounded okay, fine. Then people also said, well, we can't go straight from strategy to structure. So we need something in the middle. And what was in the middle was kind of execution type things or project type things. So you have things like programs and projects, portfolios, work packages, activities, plans and projects and that kind of thing. Prince 2 obviously has an awful lot to say in that area. But the interesting thing is the information here and information here was never discussed or thought about in terms of using these levels of abstraction. It was kind of thought of in these layers. We had strategy at the top, and then we worked out some projects, and then we executed the structure through various levels of abstraction until we got to the real world. Just as a side issue, EBMM is the enhanced business motivation model created by a guy called Nick Malik, who worked for Microsoft. I think he still works for Microsoft. And he'd kind of started looking at, well, there are all these separate things, and actually we should be looking at meta models that utilize all of these things. And he did some work in that area, so I'm not going to go into any detail about that, just to let you know what EBMM was. So I kind of looked at this information and I thought, well, if we're going to go, I was looking at it, I started to look at this rather from, because there's kind of a mixture here. Here we've got levels of abstraction for creating something, from a very high level structural description of it to a very detailed structural description. But then here we're kind of into, well, how are we doing that? And moving from each of these levels is also related to how we're going to kind of do this work. So what it occurred to me was that actually there's strategy information and this execution information, a bigger word, a bigger category of information for that is, I would say, it's all transformational information. It's about transforming. Why are we transforming? How are we transforming? What's guiding us in our transformation? All of that kind of stuff. But the way it was thought of was that while structural information was thought to exist at various levels, because we need to, if we have to deal with complexity before we can actually churn out physical change down here, the strategy work was, or strategy information was sort of associated with this highest level, and the execution level was sort of at this level, or maybe in between. And the thought process then kind of led me to this epiphany, which was that actually we have structural information and transformational information, all that exist at different levels of abstraction. So we start off with a really high level structure, for example, like an operating model. That's the highest level structure of an organization. And we start off with very high level transformational information, like a business model or a business motivation model, mission, vision, goals, objectives, that kind of thing. And as we move down through these different levels of abstraction, as we strive to get from this high level of description of what we want and high level description of the structure, we get more detailed in our transformational information. So we get into, instead of the motivation in terms of strategy, tactics, goals and objectives, we move into detailed objectives, then we move into requirements. So that's kind of where MACE and Magma came from. So from a structural perspective, we say if you want to get from high-level strategy to deployed change, the structural information can exist at different abstraction levels, and we essentially start with the highest level and keep going down until we can actually make physical change in terms of the methods, artifacts, culture and environment. And the same is true from the transformational information, as we've seen with Magma. But this information also exists at these different levels. So as we move down, we're not only refining and realizing the structure, we're also refining and realizing the transformational information. So we're getting more detailed requirements, more detailed guidance, that kind of thing. So hopefully that gives you a little bit more kind of background as to why MACE and Magma existed. They weren't just created because I wanted to create something different. They were created because it became clear to me that we needed something different to poll at and beat at. So now I wanted to move on to the Enterprise Transformation Maturity Canvas. So if we look at the measures of how are we going to assess something, people generally use maturity models. So this is an overview of the maturity models that are in POET and also in PEAF. POET maturity models look at the entire transformation domain. PEAF maturity models just look at the EA part of that transformation domain. And most maturity models only look at the methods. They tend to be process maturity models. So they might assess how mature you are at performing certain methods. But because we've got MACE, it's obvious that if we're looking at the maturity of how something is done, we should also be looking at the maturity of the artifacts that are being consumed and used. That might be information. We should be looking at the maturity of the culture and the maturity of the technical environment that we're using in order to execute these methods. So POET and PEAF has detailed spreadsheets which assess this information, but they're really too detailed to kind of get organizations interested straight off the bat. So what we created was what we call the Enterprise Transformation Maturity Canvas, or ETMC for short. If you've looked at any of our, or you've done module 1 in the self-study, you'll have met these phases before. So what we say is there are various phases that allow us to move from doing strategy work at the top through road mapping or doing our transformation roadmaps, then into executing projects that go through various phases of initiating, which is essentially kind of solution architecture, elaboration, which is more to do with physical design, constructing, which is then more to do with building or buying stuff, and then transitioning, which is to do with transitioning that into either operations or support, essentially. But what we also say is between these phases of work, which are performed by methods utilizing culture, if people are performing these methods, there's information, which are represented by these oblong boxes. So information about the enterprise's context, i.e. information about everything that exists outside the enterprise, is used as an input for the people who are doing strategizing, which is essentially business and IT strategy, what we call enterprise strategy. So this is the C-suite, SLT and enterprise architects doing this work. That produces this information, which is essentially the business model, business motivation model. That then feeds into the core of EA work, which is the road mapping, which is structural and transformational road mapping. which produces capability models and a project portfolio. Then we move into executing projects, which go through solution architecture, which produces logical designs, elaboration, which produces physical designs, constructing, which produces operational designs and operational instances or things, and then transitioning, which then ends up deploying those into the physical world, which tends to be operations. Although we could also deploy things into support or direction or transformation, of course. So this is a high level way of an organization to start to look at its transformation domain, assuming we've explained to them, hopefully, that their transformation domain exists and it's strategically important, because operations depends on the transformation capability of the enterprise. So what we then do is we sit down with groups of people that work in each of these areas. So we sit down with people who work on strategy, who work on roadmaps, who work around the solution architecture area, who do work more in the detailed design. So the idea is to elicit people's views that currently work at the organization, because no organization should come into your organization and assess you against their criteria. I don't think that's the right thing to do, certainly not the right way to start. The right way to start is to listen to the people that do these jobs and listen to what they think is good, bad or indifferent about those jobs and about other jobs either upstream of their work or downstream of their work. So then we get into actually using that measure, or the Enterprise Transformation Maturity Canvas, the assessment. First, if we use these detailed spreadsheets, then we're going to end up with a detailed assessment of things. This is just an example, and that's going to produce you some kind of, overview or overall scoring. What you score one year is not really so important. What's important is how the numbers change over the years. But these are the detailed maturity assessments that I'm not talking about today. I'm talking about when you use the ETMC to do a maturity assessment. So this is an example of a real world maturity assessment that I did at an organization. So the idea is either in separate groups or all together or 2 or 3 groups, you get people who work in these different domains, first of all, to put yellow sticky notes with their name written on it to identify the areas that they think they work in. Then to ask people to put a red sticky in an area if they think something's bad, think something's going wrong in that particular area, or red if they think information that's being generated there is bad for some reason, green if they think something good is happening in that area, or green in a square box if they think the information that is created or that is in that area is good information, or an orange sticky to suggest that there's an improvement that could be made in that area, which is a kind of a nice way of saying there's something wrong. So red and orange are kind of similar. Orange could be interpreted as being red as well. So what this does is, first of all, it gets all of those gripes, all of those thoughts of the people working in your organization about what is good and bad about how we go about doing transformation into one space that everybody can see. And just by doing that, you can obviously just visually, by seeing red or orange or green in here in one place or another, gives you an indication of perhaps where problems are likely to be and perhaps areas where you may want to start to spend some time improving those things or maturing those things. What usually happens in organizations, I find, is they perhaps want you to concentrate on one area, like road mapping, to mature road mapping. What this does is show, if there's a lot of red area in road mapping, as there is here, what's the point of us making this all nice and green if the strategizing work that's feeding it is all red? Or what's the point of making all road mapping wonderful and green if what we're feeding into it is all red? So, we're trying to get organizations to move away from point solutions to the transformation domain without considering the whole transformation domain. That doesn't mean to say you have to change the whole transformation domain. What it means is if you're going to change a small part of the transformation domain, whether it's testing tools or strategy formulation tools or whatever it happens to be, or processes or the culture, you do that understanding how that is fitting in with the whole of the transformation domain. Because at the end of the day, the business does not care about anything that goes on in here. What the business cares about is they have a strategy, they produce this information, and out of the end here, they want to see change. They don't really care about what's going on in here. So we need to look at the whole end-to-end process from strategizing to transitioning to make sure we're always looking at improving the whole thing. Yes, by improving parts, but if you just look at improving parts, you can de-optimize the whole while you're optimizing the parts. Sometimes it's better to de-optimize the parts, because de-optimizing the parts actually optimizes the whole. To do this physically, there's two ways you can do it. You can either print these things out and stick them on the wall, and physically people can come and stick sticky notes, or there's a tool that we use that allows people to collaborate in the same room, in the same country, internationally, or whatever. If you want to know more about the ETMC, I would direct you to, on the Pragmatic website, underneath this tutorial thing here, there's the Start with the ETMC. If you click in here anywhere, it'll take you to the ETMC page. There's a 20-minute presentation, which is kind of how we would start working with an organization, doing a short presentation to get people up to speed with some of the terminology. Only need a small amount of the terminology. That's one of the benefits of the ETMC. There's a BCS presentation that I did of basically the same thing. You can download a PDF of the ETMC. You can read an introduction, which is a 4-page PDF, which you can print out. If you print it out on an A3 sheet, you essentially get a folded A4 kind of a thing, which takes management, it's kind of directed at management, to get management to understand that their transformation domain is strategically important, and if they do agree it's strategically important, then maybe they ought to start at least trying to get a handle as to what's good and bad, and potentially how they might want to mature things going forward. You can also buy the book, of course, but you can read the book online, as you can do to read all of our books online on Issue. So you can just read that on a tablet or however you want to read it. If you click on Pragmatic EA, that will also take you to the bookshelf of all of our books. So all of our books are available online for free as well. For people on the call that aren't enrolled in the free self-study training, we offer instructor-led training, but we also offer this self-study, which is free. So if you click over here to self-study, you can go through the PEAF Foundation and PEAF Certified. You just need to click here to order, enter some details, apply for a license, which is free also. So if you've not already done that, I would urge you to do that also. So I've kind of got to the end of my spiel, really. So now it's over to you guys and girls and everything in between to ask me any questions that you like. I'm happy to sit here answering questions for as long as possible. If there are no questions, then that would be the end of the session. So I'm looking at there are no questions at the moment, so I'll just give people a few minutes to think of anything they would like to ask, while I also think of this, if there's anything else I wanted to say in this session. It looks like there are only... Oh, There were 3 people here, but there are now 4 people here. I think someone's just joined late. For the person who just joined late, I've just finished going through a presentation of the stuff I wanted to present, and I'm just waiting to see if anybody wants to ask any questions. Happy to stay and I'll answer those for as long as I needed, or if no questions appear in the next few minutes, then that'll be the session finished. So someone's asked, is this presentation available for download? This presentation, if I show you this, so if I zoom out, I can't zoom out anymore. So basically this slide set here, it's called PEAF2, includes every single thing that's in Poet, PEAF and PEAF2. So this section here is PEAF2, this section here is Poet, split up into various parts, Poet adoption, and then there's PEAF, which is also split up into various sections. So I've just showed you a small subset of all of that content. So this particular presentation isn't available, although this stream will be available to view later, so you can see it again there. But if you adopt to use the or you adopt this for the self-study, you will get study guides which will cover all of this material as well. Does anybody else have any questions? I'll give it another few minutes to see if any more questions surface. So I don't think there's any more questions. If you want to ask one, please ask one. I'm always available to answer people's questions either via telephone calls or emails. If you want to contact me, you can contact me at kevin@pragmaticea.com. If there's no more questions, I'll say thank you all for attending. If you have any suggestions, or you think there's errors in Poet or PEAF, or you think it could be improved, or you think something's missing, or whatever you think, always happy to hear of criticisms, especially negative ones, because if someone points out something that's missing, that's my opportunity to go and create something to fill that gap. So I'm always happy to listen to other people. Okay guys, so thank you very much for attending. I do these once a month. I split it between 8 AM and 8 PM today because I know there are people in different hemispheres, but hopefully I'll do another one next month, and I'll see you then. So thanks for attending. Bye.